Om Shanti. Welcome to this installment of Interview with a Raj Yogi. Our topic in this session is spirituality as the foundation of life. So as usual, before we begin, we'll start with a short reflection to set the context. Seated comfortably. Eyes can be open in a natural way if you choose. And in just one moment, I remind myself of why I'm seated here. To have a better understanding and mastery of my inner world based on a specific belief that my inner world very much shapes my outer experience. Defining this purpose helps me in a very natural way to focus. Allowing day-to-day thoughts, various perhaps concerns or actions, tasks to fade into the background. So I can focus on the state of my inner world and reflect more deeply on this belief that things really happen from the inside out. My inner world is a vast space with no dimension. It's completely invisible, not physical. We call it spiritual. It's a space filled with thoughts and feelings and memories and attitudes and perspectives. And at the foundation of it is consciousness. Consciousness creates the state of my inner world. One consciousness can create a peaceful, simple, powerful inner world. And a different consciousness can create a cluttered, chaotic inner world. The consciousness that I am a soul, a being of peace, transforms my inner world, the quality of my thoughts and feelings. And that, in turn, will shape how I see, how I speak, and how I act, how I show up in the outer world. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti, and welcome to those who have just joined as we continue with our series. And so this is a series of spirituality in day-to-day life, but we've been really focusing on a really powerful and important foundation to understand before we look at spirituality in our day-to-day moments. So the first 3 segments was really the focus on awareness, how awareness affects our attitudes, how awareness then affects our perceptions. And so for those who haven't had a chance to watch those interviews, we strongly recommend it, because today's topic is a pretty bold statement, that spirituality is the foundation of life, and it wouldn't make any sense unless you actually watch them. But I do find that the commentary was a beautiful, perhaps maybe a review. And perhaps, just first of all, to be open to just reflect on just how important our consciousness runs things. So you had mentioned actually in the commentary about belief. How does one then sort out if what one is doing is a belief just in the sense of, well, we all have different beliefs, and of course we know that what one believes does shape how they experience things. In terms of foundation, how does belief work when it could just be imagination?
This is one of the trickiest aspects, and really we define as the entry point into the study of Raj Yoga. It is the first thing that we want to really clarify. There's really no point in pass and go until this point is clarified. So we know as an example that before Christopher Columbus and perhaps others set off on sail, everyone believed the earth was flat. It was a deep belief based on what we could perceive at that time. So as I stand somewhere on the planet and I look off to the horizon, it does indeed look like the earth is flat, and if I go far enough, I'll fall off the edge. And so this was our deep belief. And then, travel began, and lo and behold, they watched them set off, and they seemed to fall off the edge, and yet they returned. So this discovery that the earth is not flat, that really challenged the prevailing beliefs. So we land up in this bit of a conflict between beliefs and truth. And I think ideally all of us would like our beliefs to be based on truth. But again, this leads to huge conflict. So there's no way that we're going to try to convince anyone of anything. But it is something that needs to be sorted out. I think we do want our beliefs based on truth. It's something that we put out quite clearly at the beginning of the study of Raj Yoga, that this is something that every soul needs to sort out. And so, is it the truth that our inner world shapes our outer world? Can I convince you of that? No, I can't. But it is the foundation of a spiritual practice. So this is something hopefully that will be clarified once one engages in the practice. What really is the truth about this? Once that belief is connected to truth, of course we'll throw ourselves into it fully. But it is something that needs to be clarified. And when it comes to spirituality, we cannot provide any scientific proof. So that makes it more interesting.
One of the things I loved when I came to study was the invitation for you to just experiment and see for yourself. And that really stayed with me in terms of really it's out in the open for you to explore, and you certainly can make your own conclusions. But in terms of, we mentioned about spirituality as a foundation, and for those who've been watching quite a few of the interviews, those who've taken the Raja Yoga course may already be aware of, this is the definition we use in terms of spirituality. But do you mind sort of reviewing what does spirituality mean?
In a nutshell, not physical. That's it. That really is. We use a couple of definitions for spirituality. One is non-physical, and the other is purity. So I find that really beautifully captures what we're going at. So we could use those two phrases to replace the word spirituality in every aspect. So if we're saying that spirituality is the foundation, for example, of life, I could say, well, purity is the foundation of life, and perhaps add quality of life. What's going on at the non-physical level is actually driving the show. So this is the sort of ideas that we're working with.
Can you clarify what it means by non-physical?
Everyone has an incredible facility with the non-physical, whether or not we're willing to admit it. So this is the stuff that's a bit outside the realm of science to be able to measure or detect, although they certainly make a lot of effort to capture this kind of experience. But it's really that which the physical senses cannot detect, that which is outside of, we use the term corporeal or physical. So examples would be thoughts and feelings and attitudes and perspectives. This is all material of the non-physical, and it's so powerful what the non-physical, I feel the non-physical does in terms of driving what happens on the physical level. Our attitudes have enormous effect in terms of what actually happens on the physical, our feelings, all of it. So I think we all are aware of this. Whether or not we acknowledge it in how we conduct our lives is another issue.
Now, it's interesting. For some, they may know that I am in nursing, and there is a huge movement right now in the world of science in terms of neuroscience and the relationship between thought processes, cognitive processes, and how the brain works and how there's perception. So even in that world right now of science, of seeing their relationship with pain and seeing how one perceives pain, how one responds to pain and stress and all these other contributors, and how even attitude can actually shape the experience of pain. So in regards to spirituality, what is it that spirituality has that might sort of help see much more than just what can be measured, that science is interestingly going into?
As you were sharing, I was remembering in dance class, you're really putting the body through extremes, especially, for example, in ballet, as you get into advanced, you're going onto something called point. So, you're up on the point of the foot, the top of the foot, and kind of pounding away up there. So
I didn't actually know that was literally happening.
Yes. So when the point shoes come off, I don't think anyone wants to see a picture of that. But it's pretty messy what the feet look like, as well as what you're doing to other limbs. Injuries are just constant for dancers. You're really pushing the body. Now, under a different context, unbearable. I've even heard of dancers, going on stage with appendicitis, or broken bones, sprained this and that. Yes, science will say there's adrenaline, there's etc., always that physical kind of aspect. But even not on stage, just in the classroom, in an ordinary situation, there's still really, we say, tolerating tremendous levels of pain, in terms of what's going on with the body, or so it seems. They seem to feel pain differently. Why? And I remember coming into spirituality, and we talk so much about the non-physical, specifically about awareness. And these are souls that are identifying, have a deep, deep awareness. I am a dancer. And a really deep connection to that this awareness. If in any other context, people would be crying. I see people cry if there's just a little, hangnail. So, they'd be in so much, but it was just they're bandaged. They look like they're on a war zone. They're just wrapped up in bandages everywhere. I am a dancer. And the power of that awareness to transform how they experience. This is a really interesting experiment of spirituality, that this awareness, which affects all the other non-physical aspects, but this awareness can transform what I experience. I think that's what spirituality invites us to explore, and is really the speciality of spirituality. The physical world's going on. We all are exposed to very similar situations. You'll have two people in the same situation, and they will have a very different experience. The physical is identical, but why are they having a different experience? The only answer is a difference in the non-physical. So that's all we care about in life, is how am I experiencing it? So that can only be answered ultimately by looking at the non-physical, which is what spirituality specializes in.
When you were sharing, I was remembering when I was in university, and we were coming out of a psychology class. And sorry, this little conversation that I will refer to sounds a little bit depressing, but one of my classmates was sharing. She was saying, it's so interesting because when we were just coming out of that psychology class, that two people can be in similar adverse situations, and one could, find it so overwhelming they might take their life, and someone else will have a different experience of it, and might even sort of rise to the occasion, so to speak. And I remember leaving that conversation, it's kind of depressing in a way. But listening to you share right now, it does feel like as if we may actually have a capacity that we can access to be able to redefine our experiences. Not necessarily in coping, but that there is a deeper sense of who I am and how I can see things.
Yeah, that's definitely why I find spirituality so hope-filled and empowering. Because, of course, we eventually, although it takes each of us longer and some of us never, to sort out that there's only so far we can go in controlling the physical. And this conversation, of course, is very relevant to the current times as we continue to have this pandemic globally. Only so far we can go in controlling the physical. So I'm sort of left with the non-physical aspects to create quality of life. And this is a very hope-filled vision, in the sense that, okay, there is something I can experiment with, explore, understand, cultivate, that is within my mastery to improve my quality of life. And this has been an area of interest personally during the pandemic, is have seen a range of responses, what souls have used this time for. It's fascinating, and it is from one end of the spectrum to the other, and it always seems to come down to what's happening at that non-physical level.
When someone was mentioned about spirituality can sometimes have a bad reputation. So-and-so's mentioned about things that, that it seems quite superficial, or it's not acknowledging what's really happening. What is feeding this long-standing reputation about spirituality?
I think that a huge part of what I enjoyed coming into the spiritual practice, study, and continuing is there's a little bit of myth-busting that has to happen, because there came a point when spirituality became separated from life. And so we even hear soul says, I don't have time in my life for spirituality. Where what we're suggesting is a spiritual life, this full integration, a way of living life, not something that I do separately. So, I have an hour over here that I do spirituality, and then there's the rest of my life, or day-to-day life, or back to regular life. And this is a huge concept out there. And there was this sense of the separation of spirituality, even when souls meditate. We tell souls, it's really quite powerful to meditate. And I use the word meditation with hesitation very often because it immediately activates for most separation.
Right.
But possible to be in this very introverted state, very connected to myself as a spiritual being, which is our form of meditation, while driving a car. And souls look at me like I'm mad. And I say, actually, you want to be in that state while driving a car. You're far more effective because of the capacities that are activated when we're in that state. You're far more effective. It's kind of scary that we're not. So, but again, it's because of a separation. Spirituality has gotten so connected to zoning out, disconnecting, even falling asleep, rather than activation of an enhanced state of operating, which is actually what it does. We're suggesting that when I'm in the awareness of myself as a soul, I actually unlock remarkable capacities. We are operating at a very, very small fraction of our full potential. Spirituality gives me access to my full potential. Wouldn't it be wonderful to live life every moment as sacred, or at highest potential, or whatever language is meaningful to you? But somehow, again, you say the word meditation, immediately eyes close. I've got to empty my mind of thoughts. This strange behavior happens, rather than, I'm going to go in there and activate my full potential. So a little bit of myth busting, or at least checking in on exactly what is my understanding of spirituality.
That's true.
Non-physical does not mean dead. So really have to check what that means to me.
It's interesting that when you mentioned about myth busting, because when it comes to non-physical, in a way we kind of know about the non-physical because we do talk about attitudes. If there's a debate, what is your position on something? You can't actually physically see that. That's where, when it comes to thoughts and feelings and how I see things, that is all non-physical. So it does feel like as if it's an opportunity to illuminate what's always been there, and we don't really actually acknowledge it.
It's true. I think if we're very honest, we would realize that the non-physical is really running the show. It's funny, it's these little vignettes during the day that touch me so deeply. Today is the International Day of Peace, the UN International Day of Peace. And when we think about peace, and as an example, peace prizes, the Nobel Peace Prize, that tend to be awarded for very grand, remarkable, achievements in technology, in science, in literature, and humanitarianism, bringing electricity to villages. These are remarkable, but we have to stop and think, honestly, what does this have to do with peace? We have these very physical achievements. Peace, ultimately, is a non-physical thing. It's a state, it's a feeling. And so the ultimate way to celebrate peace is to experience it, to be in a peaceful state. But we want to make it very physical, and we feel it's less concrete. this small act, if I can be in a peaceful state, this is a grand gesture. This is celebrating International Day of Peace. And, just that small act of giving myself a moment to experience that peace. Do I know how? Non-physical does not mean I don't do anything. Again, tons of myth busting. So it's really running the show. The only way, ultimately, this will be a peaceful planet is if it's populated by peaceful beings. And that, again, is a very non-physical endeavor. We can create incredible literature and technology and electricity, but if the beings, the users, are not peaceful, how will we use this technology? How have we used the technology? We see it's for peaceless means. So it's this very invisible, incognito activity that's running the show. And happy International Peace Day back to you, Binny.
It's interesting that you had shared in the past for the Peace Medal Awards. I was at the YMCA and you were invited to you were giving a speech, and I was very new in the study when you were sharing about this experience, and that peace is a personality that it's not meant to be it's not a reaction. Peace is not a reaction. And I remember that time I was like, I don't think I actually understand what you mean. Peace is a personality, that nowadays that peace is a reaction. So just in terms of you were sharing about, the Nobel Peace Prize, when it comes to so many of the accomplishments that we see and the award that goes to it. And this isn't about criticism, this is more about thought-provoking questions about what exactly is peace. When you were mentioning about peaceful beings, in relation to this aspect of, has peace become a reaction? Can you clarify what that means?
Yeah, we are living here. Some may be in other parts of the country or world, but this is coming to you from Calgary, Western Canada. And we're in a very physically beautiful part of the world. We're at the foothills of something called the Rocky Mountains. I received a very thorough education the other day about this is a very beautiful part of the Rocky Mountains, very unusual, very majestic, attracts, when souls can travel, attracts souls from around the world to these mountains. It's stunning, and it's just a 45-minute drive away. And so when souls are feeling it has a huge attraction for the souls that live here in the city. And when they're feeling very stressed during the week, go into the car, take a drive out to the mountains. They're in the mountains. The mountains, I call this peace-taking. The mountains, because they're experiencing this beautiful nature, they have this feeling of peace. That's called a reaction. The external stimuli is creating that experience. It's peace-taking. They're taking the experience of peace from nature versus peacemaking. But this is what, if I hear the right music, if someone says the right thing to me, if the lighting's just right. We have people sometimes when they're sitting in meditation, they're like, I couldn't feel peace because I didn't like that song. I need this song to play so I can be peaceful. These are clearly dependent on, so this is what we mean when we say peace is reaction, that my experience of peace is dependent on certain conditions being met.
And given the title today, or this segment for this evening and next week, that spirituality is the foundation of life, in terms of this aspect of foundation, some will say, well, what's wrong with it? I like being in the mountains. And this isn't about a point of contention, but about education, and again, provoking thought. What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But, I remember hearing one day on one side of the world, these beautiful mountains giving an experience to souls. On the other side of the world, another rock formation, avalanche, tumbling. Mm-hmm. The external can change in any moment, in a second. What's very beautiful and peaceful suddenly can become something completely different and create a completely different experience for me. There was a very famous filmmaker, some have heard of him, Alfred Hitchcock. He was brilliant at this. And he had something called The Birds, a movie called The Birds. And we see birds and freedom, and anyone who has ever seen this movie is probably terrified around birds now, because these very beautiful symbols of freedom suddenly turned into a pack of attacking machine. They look so lovely, and you could say he made a horror film. I think he was creating provoking thought. He was brilliant at taking the suggestion. He often wouldn't even have to show it, just the suggestion of how an experience can change depending on your perspective. Right. And so anytime my experience is dependent on what we call the temporary, which is what the physical is. Mm-hmm. Temporary means it will change, not if it change, it will change. My experience is dependent on it being in a certain way. It is not going to stay that way. That is a given. So this means that I have to be okay, not just with taking peace from the mountains, but I also have to be okay with the fact that it will not stay that way all the time. If I'm okay with that, then carry on. Mm-hmm. But it just means that you're living in a state of constant fluctuation. Mm. This is what leads to stress. I'm very attached. When we're very attached to things being a certain way, it will lead to stress, because things cannot stay a certain way, and the attachment is creating incredible strain on the soul.
Would you say then it's a timing piece in terms of whether that is really something that feels relevant or important to me then?
Absolutely. Every soul is different. Some it may never feel relevant, and it's okay. Absolutely. But we're back to belief. Yeah. Do you believe that things are always changing in the physical, or do you believe that things stay the same, or that you can keep things the same? I have to look at my beliefs. I'm basing my life on certain beliefs. And are those beliefs practical, relevant? Are they true? Mm-hmm. And this is something that, again, we have to acknowledge in our own lives. It's not about me trying to convince you that the physical is always changing. You might just say, well, that's your belief, give me some proof. And I don't think that's really useful. It's about you having to reflect on that and then see, based on what I understand or believe, what will my decision be? Some will never choose to look at their beliefs or even become aware of what they believe.
So, especially when we're talking about timing, and we are all a variety in this world and our experiences and where we're at in our life. We also have those who come to the door who say that that's a point where I'm tired of being affected by everything. And so in regards to that, in terms of this conversation that we're having, how does this become very useful, knowing that peace is reaction, and you might not even realize that that's what's happening, and that's why there's sorrow?
If someone is open to exploring, I'm tired of being influenced. If someone's open, this is an opportunity, and again, it still may not be the time, even though, because there's massive resistance always from within, but to start to look at what is temporary, what is ever-changing, and what is stable, what is constant, what is what we call eternal. And this, again, really defines the difference between physical and spiritual. So to say that I am tired of being affected by what is temporal, is really opening the door to what is eternal, to spirituality. Eternal is the realm of spirituality, and that's when we start to again look at truth, because we say that truth is eternal. What is eternal is truth. So this again is the realm of spirituality.
Well, I feel like we're left at a cliffhanger, but we may leave it at a cliffhanger as we continue this segment next week. But this aspect about spirituality is eternal. In light of this topic that about what does it mean it's a foundation of life, especially when we're talking about awareness and consciousness, and that's always running the show. And so we will definitely continue to explore that next week, so stay tuned. And we always invite individuals, if you have questions, you are welcome to type in the chat box on Instagram or on YouTube. You're also welcome to email the center as well with your topics or questions. And so we will have a little reflection right now.
Sometimes it might feel like we have an outer life, what we present to the outer world, and an inner life, like a secret life, what's going on inside of our head. Spirituality allows me to look at what's going on inside my head. That inner life eventually, almost inevitably, colors my outer life. If I am distressed, confused, upset, reactive, I can try to hide it, but eventually it starts to transmit through my eyes, through my speech, through my actions. As I sit here, I reflect on the beautiful possibility of having a very peaceful inner world where I am at peace with myself, able to access my own capacity for peace such that it radiates out, and also at peace with others, the situations around me. The state of calm, the state of grace in my inner world. If I'm feeling that inside, in my invisible secret life inside, how might that color my outer world? The way I approach situations or tasks, how I interact with others, how I use time. Something as simple as driving the car. How would that be colored if my inner world was one of peace? Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. We have a question here, and so whether we address it next week or now, I guess we'll bring it. So this is a question from Elegant Designs for Air. I request you to throw some light on attachment with your near ones. How attachment is important. If that is so important, why do we have relations? What do we do without attachment with parents? I lost my mother recently, and still the feeling of attachment with her pushes me to the past.
It's a beautiful question, and I don't know if it's fair to answer it in the few seconds we have. We can only throw out, again, these are based on the teachings of Raj Yoga, throw out a couple of ideas that might inspire reflection for each of us. I think your question is the essence of spirituality and what attracts me to living spiritually is the idea of relationships is so valuable to life. If we're talking about foundation of life, relationships is huge. This idea of deep love for one another, deep respect. But again, on the physical level, we know things will change. It's very reassuring when we look at spirituality to know that each of us is a soul, so we don't die, but eventually each of us will leave this package we're in, and we suggest take rebirth, so we know the soul is fine, and this alone is a bit of a reassuring thought. But of course we miss their presence. So what spirituality is teaching us, whether it is people or situations, is we enjoy the company for as long as it is available. We're aware that it is temporal in its current form, so we enjoy it, but we are in such a contentful state internally. We're able to let things go. We're able to know the soul is okay. They're continuing on their journey. I am continuing on mine. And just to know that they're okay helps tremendously. Of course we miss their presence. One thing I often do, for some reason, coming into spirituality, there have been many people who have moved on, as we say, transition, is I always think in my life, how would I like to honor the legacy of what their life inspired for me? That's how I sort of keep them present, knowing they've continued on their journey, but the legacy of what they've left in my life. I had one very close friend who, as we say, transitioned, left the body very early in their life. And knowing they're fine because they take rebirth, but if you will, keeping the legacy, the quality of what made them unique and special, inspired me in my life. I continue with that. This soul was very light, always laughing, and did have an interest in spirituality. And so I feel I sort of honor their legacy by keeping those qualities in my life. Your question is very full, and I know we can't really give it fair answer this time, but certainly it reflects important thought, so thank you for asking it.
Well, okay, before I share what I'm sharing, if Benny, thank you for mentioning that this mic was having issues. Before I speak any further, could you just confirm if it's actually working? I tried to unplug it and replug. Apologies to souls. We know it's getting late. You probably have other places to be. Okay, if you could. Okay. So Benny wanted me just to read that question again, especially for those who are viewing what was the context of Judy's answer. So Elegant Designs Forever on Instagram had asked, I request you to throw some light on attachment with your near ones. How detachment is important. If that is so important, why do we make relations? What do we do without attachment with parents? I lost my mother. Sorry, I'm losing the I can't find it here. But I lost my mother recently, and the soul was just mentioning that just remembering her is pulling her into the past, or pulling the soul into the past. And so just what Judy was sharing, perhaps we can add this topic into our spirituality and day-to-day life, or we can introduce that topic into one of our upcoming sessions. And so please join us again, and we will definitely keep your question in mind. But I do think it is connected to what our conversation is about in terms of spirituality, the foundation. But maybe we'll look at exploring about spirituality and relationships, actually, because that's all a part of what spirituality and day-to-day life is about. So excellent question. Apologies that you couldn't hear us.
Yeah, really deeply appreciate the interaction from all of you, the questions and thoughts to share. So thank you so much. And this is how we support each other in our spiritual study. So thank you. I think I've been given the mic because I'm supposed to say something else, which I always forget. So my best response in terms of sharing what's going on with our courses is to check the website. But I know that these sessions will continue on Saturdays from 2 to 3. We're figuring out the technology for this so it can be streamed to live to YouTube as well. But we offer the Soul Cafe. So a variety of different formats to explore spiritual topics. This last Saturday it was another interview. It might just be some sharing. It might be a meditative journey, a variety of different possibilities on each Saturday to explore topics. So that's 2 to 3 on the Zoom platform, and hopefully YouTube as well. We'll sort that out. And who knows, maybe Instagram. The Foundations, yes, the Raj Yoga Foundations course is being offered this Sunday, both online and on site. All the details are on the website. So that is calgary.brahmakumaris.org. .ca. calgary.brahmakumaris.ca. All the information about that and our other drop-in online courses are available on the website. So please check there for information. Thank you for joining this session, and I look forward to connecting next time. Om Shanti.